let's talk about that, right? Because this is a part of the story that I rarely get into because once again, people always want to hear about the other side of the story. Let's rewind back, and I'm about what was the young kid's name that just got
Surya.
the Surya. I was Surya's age. The name of my company is the Whitaker Group. The projects I lived in is called Whitaker. So it's paying homage to what a place that I felt like was my combine or training ground for all of the successes and failures that would help built me into the person I am today, right? So in these projects, there was one constant, or it was a couple constant, but one that was important for us at that time was basketball. And it's something that I don't talk a lot about because as an adult, you know, there's so many different people that play sports. So you never really want to dig into those details, but they're important. Because what I learned through basketball and what I learned through sport was that if I invest my time, I can be better, right? So one of my earliest memories of sport was around Surya's age is when people start, at least in my projects, people started making a choice to drop out of school was one of the choices I was seeing. Sell drugs was another choice I was seeing. And using drugs was another choice I was seeing. So dropping out of school sounds stupid to me. So it just didn't make any sense because how am I going to ever get out of the projects if I don't have education? That just didn't even make sense with my 13-year-old brain. Selling drugs didn't make sense to my 13-year-old brain either because I was poor and I couldn't wrap my mind around it at that time, if that makes sense. But what I could wrap my mind around was being accepted in the neighborhood for being able to play basketball, and I knew I could accomplish that by working hard. So through sport was the first time I noticed the result of hard work and the discomforts, the failures of going out, sucking, horrible, walking on the basketball court, horrible, 6'2", lanky, can't play, and getting my ass beat, right? But needing to come back on the court when no one else was on the court and playing by myself when everybody else was watching and doing everything they wanted to do, and me knowing that the court's gonna be packed at 11, so I had to be up at 8 if I wanted to get shots up before everybody got there, and I needed to stay after the court got empty, which meant I had to beg my mom to stay out after the street lights was out so I can go back to the basketball court and keep playing if I wanted to get better. That's why I understand the weirdness of trying to dribble with your left hand when everybody's around the basketball court watching and you're the only person on there trying to figure out a left hand or trying to figure out how to get the ball between your legs or trying to just figure out how to make a reverse layup or trying to work on a pull-up or trying to just work on anything to have a game, right? So that was my first quick win-lose proposition where I realized, I hate losing. I want to be better. Working harder than everyone makes me better. What I quickly learned is within a summer of working that hard every day, next summer, I drug everybody. Left hand was good enough, could get to the hoop good enough, could learn the traits. Obviously, I was 6'2", got some coordination and realized I could jump, figured out how to dunk a basketball. When you could dunk a basketball and get to the hoop in the projects, you get somewhere fast. So I went very quickly from the kid that was laughed at to the kid that was talked about and wanted to be picked first. That was the first thing that made me realize there's something to be said for leadership, and hard work happens when no one's watching. Hard work happens when it's just you and God doing work together to get better. That's when change and hard work happens. It doesn't happen when everybody's watching. It's not fun. It's intimidating. You feel desperate, you feel awkward, but that's when hard work and that's when change, growth, maturity, that's when it happens, right? LeBron James didn't become LeBron James because of anything other than hard work, and God made him 6'8", but the hard work, there's a lot of people that's 6'8" out there that does not have his skill set because they're not putting in the work. That's the first part. Now let's fast forward into getting older and evolving into projects, right? I played basketball through high school and that was the thing that kept me away from trouble, but I still lived around trouble. And in growing up, I didn't, because you're surrounded by drugs, it desensitized it desensitized the legalization of it, right? Because I lived in a community where people, it was all that surrounded us, right? So when I made the decision to eventually sell drugs, I felt like it was harmless. Like, okay, I'll sell some weed. I was 14 years old, piss poor. Mom couldn't do much for me. The only thing I had, but because I could play basketball, all the dudes around the projects like me, they all wanted to take care of me. So I figured like, hey, I could sell weed to these dudes and things would be okay. And they were, right? So I went to school during the school year. I sold weed and played basketball in the summertime. And for the most part, it was insulated and it didn't feel bad because the social system that was my housing projects protected me from that. But to the outside world, it's illegal, right? So now I've already got myself comfortable with making bad choices, right? Because we don't realize in our situations, because we're so insulated in the outside world, in a lot of cases, we feel like it doesn't care about us. And being honest, in a lot of cases, they actually don't, right? Which is another conversation for another day. I was setting myself up for failure at that time without ever realizing that I was setting myself up for failure. So leading up to the question that you guys talked about, going to prison, you fast forward, starting off selling a little bit of weed, turned into a whole lot of weed, if that makes sense, right? Because those same things that you live by, you eventually die by. And being indicted was probably the most vulnerable I've ever felt in my life, because it's like, hey, that's the biggest mistake I've made in my adult life was not being arrested. It was choosing to sell drugs, which led me to getting arrested. The police got a job to do, right? It's to block up people to break the law. I was breaking the law for tons of reasons, right? And to Coach Mike's point, I had to address, how could I allow myself to get comfortable breaking the law? B, how could I, because at 14, I didn't know any better. By the time I got indicted, I was 20, right? And in college. So at that point, I had to realize like, hey, what are some of the other choices that I could have made? Well, at several times, I had tried to make the choice to stop selling drugs. So at times I would stop and not sell drugs, and it would be on and off. But it was a partly of, the most important thing was A, who I chose to surround myself with. B, the environments I chose to constantly put myself in. And C, the justification that I gave myself for doing it. All those things were incorrect. Because the choice I could have and should have made was to just focus on the most positive path forward and go there. Now, because I made the mistake, and once I made the mistake, wasn't going to harp on it. I realized that, hey, I made a mistake. Because of this mistake, I'm going to lose 3 years of my freedom. But how can I take this time that I'm going to lose and make it the best time in my life? Like, how can I take this 3 years? They're going to take me out of society and use this time to come back into society and be the best possible version of myself. So during my time incarcerated, I done 3 things. I probably read every damn book in the business section of the library, every business book in Barnes and Nobles that anybody could possibly send me. I wrote business plans for the retail business that I'm currently in, real estate plan that I executed when I came home, a barbershop that I've kind of opened but never really did. I wrote more business plans in prison than I probably can ever remember. I basically used that time in prison as a mental boot camp to prepare myself for the rest of my life, if that makes sense. I'll stop because I just said a lot so we can unpack some of that.